Welcome back to another edition of Maryland Family Matters. It is my great privilege to introduce to you our guest for today, and that's David Hoyt. David is the Executive Director of School Boards for Academic Excellence. David is coming to us from Florida today. David, welcome to Maryland Family Matters.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I was at a conference a couple of days ago that David put on and his organization put on, and it was a phenomenal conference. And I'm just so delighted, David, that you have agreed to be a guest of ours today. We're going to be talking about school boards, about the importance of school boards, and why Marylanders should have an interest in and a commitment to making our school boards better. Before we get into the meat of the discussion, David, tell us a little bit about School Boards for Academic Excellence. How long have you been around? How long have you been leading that organization? And why are you in this line of work?
Great, thanks. Yeah, so SBAE is a pretty new organization. We were publicly launched in the beginning of 2024. And sort of the idea behind SBAE is if you look at school board members compared to state legislators, certainly federal legislators, they don't have nearly as much support in terms of policy change and advisors and things like that other types of legislators get. The one source that they have for that sort of thing is pretty much the state school board associations across the country. Yep. And you may remember back in 2019 or 20, the National School Board Association reached out to the Biden administration to complain about parents who were showing up at school board meetings, oftentimes in response to COVID and a lot of inappropriate materials that were now being seen because we could all see what was going on in the classroom. And and so they said that they wanted the National Guard to be called in because these parents were domestic terrorists for daring to. Yeah. So that was, a lot of the impetus behind SBAE was in response to that network of organizations and trying to provide an alternative for right-thinking school board members.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about your work. What does SBAE do? How do you serve school board members? And where do your members come from?
So we are set up as a national network of state-based organizations, not unlike Family Policy Alliance, or if you're familiar with the State Policy Network, because we believe that reform is a local issue, and especially education is a local issue. And people on the ground in their states are going to know a lot better than we will what their constituents really need. And so the types of things that those organizations are doing for school board members include helping them create better policy, because at the end of the day, the school board is a governing authority. And then also to give them training. Training is one of the most important things in most states. School board members are required to take some form of training. And the training that they get from what I refer to as the education establishment is typically disempowering, telling them to just go along with what the superintendent says. And inevitably, 90+% of superintendents are part of the education establishment. They probably got a master's or a PhD in education from some university that shares ideologies that you and I would probably not find very agreeable.
And so many of these local school districts, at least here in Maryland, they have line items in their budget that make you scratch your head. I mean, I'm just thinking of our largest school district here, Montgomery County, largest, I think, in terms of budget. Millions and millions of dollars are spent on legal fees, trying to fight ideologically charged legal battles that have nothing to do with reading, writing, and arithmetic.
That's exactly right. I can't tell you how common it is to look at the meeting minutes from school board meetings and see how much time are you guys actually talking about anything remotely academically related, and it's less than 10% almost every time.
It's almost all funding. It's all about money, how much money we're doing for this or that, rather than test scores, rather than phonics instruction, rather than, different math teaching methods or whatever. It's all bureaucratic conversation typically.
Absolutely.
So let me just ask you a couple of things that may be going through some of our listeners' minds, and that is, one is, hey, look, I went to public school. The public schools were fine when I went through. And I'm saying this as myself, David. Both myself, my wife are proud public school graduates. My wife's father taught in public school for 43 years as an English teacher, the same school that he went to as a kid. What's the big deal? I thought public schools were good enough.
Right, right. Well, that's certainly a perception in a lot of places. I'm also a product of
Hmm.
public schools, and it's an interesting thing. I grew up in the suburbs of Houston. It's about as conservative of an area as you could possibly get, the kind of place that people move to try to get a good education for
Yeah,
their kids. And that, I graduated high school in 2000. And even back then, when I was doing U.S. history, we were reading Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, which, of course, is
right.
explicitly communist, very popular for some reason, U.S. history book. And since then, I think what a lot of parents found post COVID when they saw what was being taught is it's gone completely off the rails, even in that period of time.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple different problems. One is that there has been a massive leftward drift in instructional materials and instructional practices. So it's not
Yeah.
even just that like the textbooks are biased, they are, but
Yeah.
it's also that the way that they do instruction has been undermined. So it's no longer the way you and I were taught, where a teacher stands at the front of the classroom and gives information to kids and kids absorb information. Now it's much more collaborative, and there's no shortage of research that shows that's actually not effective. Letting
Yeah.
kids lead things before they've been taught anything, lo and behold, doesn't help anybody learn.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's very interesting, and kind of gets to another point that I wanted to ask, and that is, if you're listening to this conversation, maybe you're like myself and my wife. We're now empty nesters. We don't have kids in the school system anymore. Why should I be concerned if I'm an older Marylander with the state of our schools? Look, we pay our taxes, but we don't send our kids there anymore. What's the big deal?
Yeah, well, that is a really good question. And I'll tell you, it kind of goes to why I started working in education policy in the first place. I've worked for a large number, more than I'd like to admit, of different conservative and libertarian activist, think tank type organizations, and worked on a variety of different issues from taxes to education, healthcare. And what I found was if we really want to change the direction of the country, and I think any of us who are involved in public policy is why we do what we do, there's
Yeah.
nothing more important than education. And those kids that are in those classroom, that is the next generation. And if you look at voting trends, you can see that the way that the next generation is headed is probably not the America that retirees in Maryland or anywhere else would recognize.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me throw out another maybe thought that someone might be having, and that is, my impression was that school board members are typically, leaders in the community, you sort of good people who are just kind of serving in a non-ideological fashion. And so why should I even be concerned with what they're doing? Is that a misperception?
Not exactly. The problem with school boards that I find is it's not that we don't have good, well-meaning school board members that are elected into public office. By and large, we do. The problem is they get completely railroaded by the education establishment. Because if you start to unpack what it would consist of to, for instance, change, like if you set a requirement for high quality instructional materials, which is
Yes.
something that we certainly would push for, because that gets
Yes.
rid of a lot of that political bias without having to introduce politics into the classroom. You could create a much better learning environment for everyone, get rid of the negative stuff, but it's really hard to do that because you have a lot of state requirements around curriculum and instructional materials. And then it's
Right.
not always clear from district to district what the governance and oversight role is in doing that. And as a result, what I always say is inertia is the strongest force in any
Mm.
school district. It's much
Mm.
easier to just go along to get along because, your average community member may not be an expert in curriculum. That's where groups like ours can step in with experts that are on our side and can help. But 90+% of school districts are not really looking closely at what's being taught. And so even if they are well-meaning, they're just letting the fox run the hen house.
It's interesting. You mentioned that high quality instructional materials. That was a phrase that I learned in attending your recent conference for school board members across the country. It was an excellent conference, and I learned a number of things. I learned that phrase actually from a fellow Marylander who was here, who was at the conference presenting, someone from the Center for Educational Research at Johns Hopkins University, presented on this very thing about the science of reading and high quality materials that our kids are learning. So I just want to mention that, David, because your conference is not some sort of crazy right-wing Christian nationalist bomb-throwing exercise. It's you bring in real experts, real education experts, some of whom are from Johns Hopkins here, to tell us what the research is saying and what the best method is of teaching. I think that's a really important point for us to emphasize about SBAE.
100%. The way I always put it is our ideology is student achievement. And
Hmm.
if somebody wants to get that done, we want to work with them to help it. Now, we have a view on what leads to student achievement, and that is often at odds with the educational establishment. But certainly, people from well known university centers like Johns Hopkins universities are the type of partners that we want to seek out.
Another presentation you had at the conference was on the science of reading, which has been getting a lot of attention. I didn't really know much about it until I went to the conference, um, um, but that's something that our superintendent of education here in Maryland is known for. Dr. Terry Wright, who came to Maryland from Mississippi. I would just encourage anyone to go to the SBA website, take a look, access your information and materials. It's really very helpful.
Well, thank you. Absolutely. Yeah, you guys in Maryland are very fortunate. Science of reading is one of those things where 46 or so states have state level requirements, but many school districts just don't have the know-how or interest in making sure it's happening at the classroom level. But yeah, you guys got a good one on her.
Let me ask you this question, David, kind of bring the conversation up to the 30,000-foot level. In your view, as the head of School Boards for Academic Excellence, what makes for a good school board member and what makes for a bad school board member?
That's a really good question. I'll tell you the one thing that I think defines a good school board member is somebody who is not afraid to take on the powers that be in a district in a constructive way. At the end of the day, having a superintendent who's on your side and shares your vision for improving the school district is much better than creating an oppositional relationship. But the school board is in charge, and they're the ones who are empowered by their constituents to make sure that kids are learning at a high level. And when you look at reading scores, math scores across the country, it's pretty abysmal. And many states are inflating their scores and watering down standards so that it looks better than it really is. But if you look at the more objective national tests, kids are not learning as well as they used to be. And so a school board member who has that vision and does not take no for an answer in defense of the best interest of their kids is one who's a good school board member. And then a bad school board member is just the opposite, basically, of that.
Tell me about how would you give advice to someone who's listening to this podcast, just an average person who may have a concern about education, may have a desire to see our schools be the best that they could be. What would be your advice to them if they wanted to engage with their local school board member? How should they do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a couple different ways. One thing that I actually would not encourage necessarily, and it depends on the situation because there's a high degree of variability, is but making public comments at school board meetings, generally speaking, in my view, is not the most constructive thing to do, with the exception of if you have a school district where they're making decisions that are completely at odds with the community and you can organize a group of people to speak on the same issue and you have your ducks in a row. Like I've seen a lot of these things where someone from the community will show up and make not constructive comments, and that doesn't help anybody, just throwing bombs and things like that. But when people come in, especially if you have something that's backed by a research study, we do have a good research page on our website that people can access on a variety of issues. But if you have a group of constituents who are well prepared to make a well-made point that is in defense of student success, that's one way of doing it. But at the end of the day, I think there's a large number of parents' rights groups that are good to look into. We work a lot with some of the folks at the conference from Defending Education, for instance, is a really good example. And they have local chapters, and working together with a community of like-minded people, I find to be much more effective.
Let me ask you this question, just taking it one step further. What would you say? What would your advice be to that person who may be listening who says, yeah, I'm with you on all this stuff. I've actually done many of the things you've just described, but I want to take the next step. I'd like to run for my local school board. What would be your advice to that person who wants to take it to that next level?
The most important piece of advice I have is do it, because we need good school board members. It's amazing how many people I talk to who have been working in education policy and reform for a long time who have said school board members are not the same quality that they were 20 years ago. And that's not to complain about the people who have actually taken that step, because that's a high calling and it's a hard job, and I'm certainly not critical of them. However, the stereotype used to be that you have a lot of people in the past who were maybe semi-retired or retired from a professional career, leaders in their churches, people like that who are real community leaders that were running for school board. And in recent years, that's decreasingly been the case, I think, for a variety of reasons. So that's the most important piece of advice, is to do it. The second is to look out for organizations who are here to help you. There are a lot of good organizations that do the basic training for how to run for school board. And the thing with these school board races is a lot of them are off cycle, so turnout is very low. And as a result of that, the people who wind up turning out are often the vested interests. Teachers unions tend to play an outsized role in that. And so learning the basics of campaigning is really important, but it doesn't take that many votes in many districts to win.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit about this at the conference that we were recently at. There was a group there, the 1776 project, that helps reform-minded school board members get that practical knowledge that they need. And it's been amazing here in Maryland how many big organizations are investing big time in school board races because they know that those seats do exercise outsized influence, just like you mentioned.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, if someone wants to be connected to your organization, David, how would they do that?
Well, thank you. I think probably the best way, we're on the most of the main social media platforms. We do post fairly frequently on Facebook and Twitter in particular, and on LinkedIn as well. But the main thing I would recommend is to sign up for our newsletter. If you go to our main URL is SBAEnetwork.org, there's a area at the top where you can sign up for our bi-weekly newsletter. It's very popular and has tons of resources, upcoming events, and just analysis from the reform side of the equation.
That's SBAE Network .com?
.org.
.org.
Yep.
And I just want to attest to that, David. I get that email every other week. It is chock full of really important, great articles, research-focused articles. And in addition to the email that you send out, you have a number of webinar opportunities that are available to folks on a variety of different subjects. I think it's every week you're doing a webinar. Is that right?
We do, I think, 2 a month with the webinars, and then we do special ones as well. So it winds up being, pretty close to them.
A lot of really helpful, great information in the education space, and a broad swath. It's not just one view. You're going to get a wide range of views, but all on that focus of what will increase student achievement. That is sort of your main goal. It's one of the reasons why we are just so grateful for our partnership with you, with SBAE. We love being affiliated with you, and we're so grateful for the work that you're doing to improve the lives of the next generation of American leaders.
Well, thank you. The pleasure is certainly ours working with you all.
Our guest today has been David Hoyt from the School Boards for Academic Excellence, SBAE. We're so grateful for your being with us, David, and we look forward to the next time that we get the chance to talk with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.